And hello, welcome. This is our town hall. You'd think that 2.5 years into COVID, I would be past all of these sort of Zoom glitches, but clearly my brain and my computer are ready for summer. So I'm delighted to welcome you here tonight. I'm Katie Dunn, Director of Educational Planning at PrepMatters. I do a lot of these, but this is the only one where we get to really focus on the experience of PrepMatters students. And as we were just discussing with these fabulous panelists, the awesome part of this is they're done. They've graduated from high school. They're ready for college. They're enjoying summer. Some of them already on trips. Several of them about to go on trips. They are doing lots of great things to enjoy the fruits of their very impressive labor. So I've asked them here tonight, along with my colleague Maureen Delaney, to share a little insight from a student perspective about kind of what matters and what doesn't as you go through this experience. And so I'm going to jump in by asking each of their where they recently attended high school and where they will be headed to college. And then I've also asked them to think about an opening question that is, now that this process is behind you, what part would you say was the most meaningful? So I'm going to ask our lone gentleman here, Ricardo, to get us started. So Ricardo, if you want to introduce yourself and tell us where you just graduated from high school, where you're headed to college, and what part of this process was the most meaningful or important for you?
Yeah, of course. I'm Ricardo. I graduated from McLean High School just now. I'm heading to the University of Pittsburgh. And I'd say the most meaningful part of the process was writing the essays. I thought that was really cool.
Excellent. That's how I helped you write your essay, or I listened to you write your essays. So I'm glad to hear that. And yeah. Ronnie, how about you?
Hi, my name is Ronnie. I just graduated from Washington International, and I'm going to NYU next year. And I would say the most meaningful part of the process was kind of at the end, where I knew where I was going, and I got to get really excited about the school I'm going to, and kind of reflect on all my accomplishments and the whole college process.
And Coral?
My name is Coral. I graduated from Meridian High School, and I'm going to William & Mary in the fall. And I think the most meaningful part for me was visiting a couple of the schools that I got into and making my decision.
And we, perfect timing, have our final panelist with us, Dallas. Tell us where you just graduated from high school and where you are headed to college, and what for you was the most meaningful part of this process?
I graduated from Sidwell Friends School. I'm going to NYU Stern in the fall. And the most meaningful part of the process for me was, like Ronnie said, getting on campus, seeing the people that I'll be classmates with in the future. And that was a really exciting thing for me to see.
And the crowd of class of 2022 is the first class in a couple of years that has really been able to meaningfully do those camps for a lot of you. I should mention to the audience that though I have some questions prepared, and Maureen may have some as well, that we will ask the students. We've also gotten a chance to get to know them over the year. But any questions you would like to share, please drop them into the Q&A box. You can also take a look at the Q&A box, and if there's other questions you would like the answer to, just feel free to upvote it, and we'll make sure that we address those as well. We really do want this to feel like a town hall, as if we were all kind of in the room together. Okay, so now when you think about this process, now it's June and you are settled happily into your summer and you were all highly successful. What's something that you wish you knew then that you know now? If you had advice for your August of senior year self, what would that piece of advice be? I'm going to start with Coral.
Something I was thinking about that I wish I knew when I was making my decision at the end is I wanted to make sure that at first I tried to consider every category of each school, but that was a lot to think about. So I think it's important to like pick the few things that you can compare between schools that you want to focus on and just know what you're looking for in a school. And that doesn't have to be in like every single category.
And knowing what you're looking for in a school is actually pretty hard to do. So let's come back to that question in a second. Dallas, how about you? What would you tell your August 2021 self?
I would tell my August 2021 self to have more hope in myself in the college admissions process. Early on, it's easy to like get discouraged and see videos of people on TikTok getting into college or getting rejected from college and thinking like, oh, I'm not good enough. Oh, I can't apply to this college because I'm not going to get in. Or I should only apply to these safety schools because they have this admission rate. But the truth is that everybody that I've talked to in the college admission process really diminishes their own self-worth going into the process. And everyone, all of my friends, we're in the Beach Week house right now. We're all into great colleges. We're all really happy, even though at the beginning we were kind of stressed about the process. So one thing I'd like to tell myself is that it's going to be okay. Even if you don't get into your first choice, your second, your third choice, you're going to be exactly where you want to be and exactly where you need to be near the end.
I might capture that and just play it for all of my students over and over and over again for every year. Also, I had forgotten that you were at the Beach Week house, Dallas. That is probably the cleanest Beach Week background I think I've ever seen. I've been to some Beach Weeks. So clearly you're all very responsible. Nicely done.
I'm also at
Ron-
my beach week.
Oh, are you guys at the same beach?
I don't know. I'm in Corolla, North
Oh,
Carolina.
you are at the same beach.
Yeah.
We should go get pizza later.
No way.
And Ronnie, how about you? What is your biggest piece of advice?
Something I would say is that when I was like first applying to colleges, I kind of took the approach that was like apply to as many as I can. And then a lot of those schools I didn't even end up wanting to go to in the end. So I would say make sure you're applying to schools you know you'd be happy at and that have everything you want. So when you're making that decision later, you're only stuck with a list of schools that you know you'd be happy at each one instead of just applying to apply.
Oh, that's great advice. And Ricardo, our last bit of advice.
I'd say like get in contact with universities as soon as you need something from them and as quick as possible. Don't let anything like until later, because I had to make a decision within like the final week because I kind of slacked off on messaging colleges about financials and that type of stuff. So message them early because they take some time to respond.
Yes, I believe that Ricardo and I had some conversations on around April 30th about where you were making your final choices. So you did put yourself to
Yep.
the end. And all of you actually ended up with some great choices. And you do want to think carefully about Ronnie's point. You don't want to have too many options that you can't even really remember why they were on your list. You want to be very thoughtful in building that list to begin with. So let's go back to Coral's point and Ronnie's. How do we do that? Would you say, as you think about the process from going from, say, early part of junior year, where you probably had an idea of like, I want to go to college, and then to where you are now, what were some really helpful parts of researching colleges? What were the tools you used to research colleges and really start to get a sense of what schools would be the right fit for you? And I'm going to have Ricardo start again since he went last time.
Oh, I'm sorry. Could we repeat the question? It was a bit long.
What did you use for researching that you found helpful?
Primarily the FISC guide. That was like my main go-to for pretty much everything. All the summaries they have there are really helpful to like just get to know a school before you go and visit them.
One of the things I love about the FISC guide is that they interview a lot of students. There's a lot of student information and surveys and quotes, and you get a real sense of kind of the vibe before you even get on campus. So I'm glad to hear that was helpful for you. Dallas, how about you? What were some tools you used to research and build your list?
I use multiple websites. I use US News, which I feel is the primary one to find out about colleges. I also use Niche as well. But for my major, which is finance, I was like looking at specific colleges and how well they would be in certain majors. And I also looked at starting salaries or career opportunities going out of that college. Like I'm going to NYU, so I'll be in New York, which is a marketing financial hub of the United States. And I was also looking at places in California, which are also financial hubs to a certain extent. So I would say that when you're researching colleges, don't only research what's going on at the college, what you'll be doing at the college, but where the college will get you following graduation.
That sounds like a very business major decision to make. I was an English major. I'm not sure I could figure it out what I was going to be doing after college, but well done. Good choice.
Can I jump in for a
Coral,
second?
Sure.
I just wanted to say, Dallas, can you talk about the summer before your senior year? Because wasn't that pivotal to this plan you had of sitting down and really systematically looking at schools and thinking about finance?
Well, yeah, the summer before my senior year, I did a trip. I was at Oxford. It's like this summer camp thing that people should definitely look into. It's called Oxbridge, and basically I got like a little insight into business, and not only business, but international business. I went overseas, so it was really interesting to look at how different countries, specifically England, overlook business practices. And that program got me a recommendation letter. It gets you like, you get like a little report card that you can use and put on your college applications. And also one of my teachers there, I'm still friends with him today. And he gave me some insights onto how international countries look at United States business schools if you ever wanted to leave the country.
I hadn't realized that the program you did was Oxford. I actually ran one of their summer programs a number of years ago, and am also still friends with some of my students that were in high school then. That's a great program. We did have a question about how many schools each of you applied to. I'm going to give you a moment to think about that and do some math in your head while we go through a few more thoughts from Coral and Ronnie on researching and thinking about choosing their school. Coral, I know you especially were looking really specifically at some programs there at the end to try and figure out where, much like Dallas, where you would have the best kind of academic experience. Can you talk to us a little about that?
Yeah, for like choosing the colleges I was going to apply to, I went to a lot of like virtual information sessions, but I also looked up a lot of stuff online on like colleges' websites to see if they had specific like classes and programs that I would be interested in for like academics and stuff. So I definitely did some research there. And
then at the end, when you were thinking about these final couple of, you had some fabulous choices. So how did you decide?
Yeah, that was really tricky. I went and visited all of them, and then I tried to like focus on what would be best for like the top things that I considered were like kind of size and campus, but also academics. So I ended up choosing like the biggest of my last three options because they had a lot of great opportunities in biology, which is what I wanted to do.
Great. And Ronnie, how about you?
I agree with what everyone said. I went to a lot of like webinars like this about like the student experience, and then specifically going to like, I wanted to major in psych. So I went to like every school psych like department website specifically, and then you can look at specific classes, you can research professors. And then also something that I found helpful was talking to like alums from my own school, because I went to a pretty small high school. So you could just reach out to them and they would tell you about their experience. Because I think like academics is obviously super important, but also knowing like more about student life and how that like living experience is too.
Talking to students on campus is such a good choice. And if you don't know someone who's at a school you are considering, much like Ricardo said, reach out to the admissions office. They'll connect you with a current student. They'll even connect you with a current student in a program that you're interested in, so you can find out kind of what it really feels like. We have had this question from the audience. How many schools did you apply to? I actually don't know the answer for this, I think for all four of you. So I'm nervous that we're going to say out loud some nutty numbers, but let's, you are still lit up, Ronnie. So let's start with you.
So not counting the UCs as like individual schools, I applied to 6 UCs, so 22 or 23 schools total.
Oh, girl, that's so many essays.
It was a lot of essays. I wouldn't recommend applying to that many schools, but that's how it ended
Well, and
up.
as you said, I think it was hard to figure out exactly what you were looking for in each school. So that does sometimes end up expanding the list. And when all of you were getting started with your process, most colleges weren't open for visitors yet. So you didn't have a chance to really do some of that culling of the list early. How about you, Ricardo? How many schools did you apply to?
I kept it simple. I only applied to 5 schools. So, you know.
So we've got both ends of the spectrum here. I did that on purpose
Yeah.
to ask you guys next to each other because I knew those answers. Dallas, how about you?
I applied to around the same amount as Ronnie. I applied to maybe like 24 to 25 schools. I filled out my entire Common App, and I also applied to St. Andrews, which is in Scotland, and I applied to McGill and the UC schools.
Wow,
think
did
4
you
of them.
guys just have so much time on your hands when these applications were done?
Well,
and-
the worst part was I ended up not like seeing the results of my application since I had to rescind the offers after getting EDC to NYU. So.
You applied ED. Okay, well, let's talk about that. That's a great, we'll get to that. That's a great point. And Coral, how about you? How many schools were on your list?
I think I applied to 15 or 16.
Okay. So we've got a range here. And I think that's one thing that's worth kind of taking away from this webinar is that it really is a very personal decision. And I want to go back to Dallas's point for a second. So Dallas said he applied ED2. Is that what you said to NYU? So that
Yeah, I applied ED2.
he had already submitted a ton of applications, and then he called NYU and said, "I've decided you're my first choice. If I get in, I'm going there, and I will rescind all my other applications." But that also means that once he got in, he was done, and he didn't have to think about anything else anymore. So there are some I think some questions and sort of balances when people think about whether or not they want to make an ED decision for an ED application. Dallas, can you walk us through some of your thinking on kind of how that process worked for you?
Well, the ED process for me, early on in the process, I really didn't want to pick an ED school because I was scared I was just going to be stuck with that decision and I'd go on campus and I'd hate the school and hate the people. So I didn't really want to do that. But I did end up ED1. I ED1 to UPenn, their arts and science school, and I didn't get in, but I'm very glad that I made the decision because I feel as though if I didn't do that, I would be thinking like, what if I had applied? What would have happened if I did? Would I have gotten in? And I think that's the case for most of the schools that I applied to. I would say if you want to apply to a school, then you should apply to it because otherwise you'll be wondering what if by the end of the process. And that's not really a position you want to be in.
Right. Thinking to yourself, it's okay if I never know if I got into this school is an important part of the question of whether to choose to do an ED application. Okay, so here's, I think, a really useful question, but please know that we are not looking for any confessions here. How involved do you think a helpful parent should be in your process? So maybe what were some things that were helpful that your parents did? Maybe what were some things that weren't? Or just kind of where maybe your parents fell in the range of like super heavily involved or like a little more of a step backwards. Would anyone like to jump in and begin with this one?
I can start.
Great.
So I would say my parents at the beginning, they definitely wanted to be super involved. Like they kind of like made my like first list for me and they were like too involved to like my liking. And whenever like I started getting decisions back, my mom would like take it personally. And so it would like affect me more than it should. So then we kind of had a conversation and I was like, I'm capable of doing this. Like I'm the one going to college. And so once we had that conversation and I got more decisions back in the spring, it was just really helpful to just have them like in the background, like still supportive. But since it's like ultimately my decision where I'm going to go, I think parents should obviously be involved as much as you like, but since it's you, you shouldn't like let them make like the decisions for you. And I think it's important to have like a good boundary, or else it'll start like affecting you more than it should.
I love that. I love the idea of strong boundaries. Coral, how about you?
I think my parents are like pretty good in the process. I think it was helpful for them to like remind me to stay on track of like all the different applications I had to submit. But I do think that you should be able to make your own decisions. And I feel like once it got to the end and I was trying to choose my school, my parents were getting like, they were like kind of going back on if we should make the final decision. So then it was kind of good for me to just say, I'm going to decide and like, we're not going to regret it. And yeah, I just think that you should be making like the decisions for yourself, but a parent can be helpful if you need to ask them like their opinion in a decision. I did that too. So.
Right. Turns out your parents sometimes know things. Sometimes the adults have some things that they know. Dallas, how about you?
I feel as though my parents were pretty helpful throughout the process. They gave me all the resources I needed to be successful in the college process. They got me into PrepMatters very early on. I think late sophomore years when I started talking with Maureen, and they helped me get the tutors for the SAT and stuff like that. So that really helped me. But when the actual application process started, they were fine. It was okay. They would push me to apply to certain colleges, more reaches than safeties. And I think that was really good for them to do, because again, that helped me get my hopes up and helped me push me when I really didn't want to push myself. And taking me to visit colleges was also really helpful. They took me down to California because I really wanted to go to California. And I saw a bunch of colleges that I liked. UC Berkeley ended up being my dream school. It didn't end up that way, but at a certain time it was. And they took me to Claremont McKenna, which I didn't personally like. I felt like it had summer camping vibes, the dorm. So I was able to cross that off my list. So they were pretty helpful throughout the process, and they kind of laid off my back once I got into a certain amount of colleges. So I feel like they were pretty good. I think a healthy parent should just push their kids to where they believe that their kid is able to go, and just help them a little bit over the process, remind them to do their essays, do stuff early on. And that's really about it.
Ricardo, how about you? What would you say how would you kind of characterize your parents' involvement, and what would you say was helpful or not helpful about it?
I mean, yeah, my parents were kind of different, each one of them, but my dad went through like what you mentioned, parents know things. I think a helpful parent should be there to, help make rational decisions. And that's certainly what he did, from the start. He prioritized looking at schools, in like a more rational kind of like looking at the numbers, looking at the statistics kind of way, instead of just, like how good their basketball team did this year, or emotional stuff like that. But what I think a helpful parent shouldn't do is stress their kid out, which is no more what my mom did, where, from the start, I had expectations to get into, like really good schools, with really good scholarships. And, it gets to a point where it can be hurtful to put that amount of pressure. So that wasn't so nice, but in the end, it was pretty good.
It sounds like all four of you also, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but maybe are even a little bit grateful for the sort of journey you took this year, where you were able to figure out what was helpful for you and where you could set that boundary, and where you could say like, here's where I need you, here's where I really don't need you, and I'm ready to do this. And that's part of the process of getting ready to go to college and being able to make some of those decisions on your own. Maureen, I'm going to ask you this question too, because Maureen and I work with a lot of parents and have done so for many, 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 many years. So of all the different kinds of parent involvement that you've seen over the years, Maureen, is there anything that you would say is sort of a great piece of advice that is really helpful for parents sort of launching this process with their students?
I think honoring the process and listening to your son or daughter, because students need different amounts of help, and situations call for different levels of support. For example, if a student is auditioning for a music program, they're going to need some help to plan for those auditions and all the travel time and working that out. So I often tell students, hey, your mom, you're going to have to, your mom or dad, they're going to have to be involved in this planning. Just think of them as administrative assistants, right? It's not, they're not hovering too much. So I give them a heads up because that's the case, but also developing preferences, looking and seeing how are these undergraduate schools different from one another. I think a parent who's listening and having conversations can point out sometimes how two schools can be different from one another. But again, kind of gauge the involvement and proceed with what's comfortable for your own child.
Right. I've noticed over the years that often when they start this process, especially, students don't always know all of the things that are great about themselves, and parents usually do. So you should listen to your parents a little bit when they try and highlight some of your strengths, because those probably are real strengths that it might take you a little bit more time to identify.
They have great memories about what you've done over the years.
Yeah.
So it can help those conversations.
So one of the places that we often see parents involvement being helpful and sometimes not helpful is in the whole process of getting through your college essays. So there's a couple of different questions I want to touch on here. And we have one from the audience that is a very straightforward and I think a really important one to be asking in June. When did each of you finish your main Common App essay? When did you say like, all right, this one's in, moving on to some supplements? Now it's been a while, but give us a sense of what your timeline was like for your essays. I know each of you ended writing a ton of essays. So tell us where you started and where you think you finished the first one, and kind of what that timeline looked like for you. And then we'll dig a little bit in more what the essay process was like. Dallas, do you remember when you started your Common App essay?
Maureen will probably remember this better than me, but I think I started it summer going into my senior year. And then I was still writing it down to the wire, like 2 minutes before I hit that submit button.
Wait, I have to add something. So it wasn't that he hadn't finished it, is that Dallas
I finished it,
tweaking it, right?
Yeah.
He was tweaking it down to the last wire, right?
Dallas was not quite ready to call it done.
Yes.
Exactly. I'll just be playing.
He wrote very, he applied to a lot of schools. So you were writing a lot and then retweaking the Common App. Yeah.
Does anyone remember when you started and when you finished that main essay, roughly? Ronnie?
I started mine like a year ago today. And then I finished like a draft by like the earliest application I had was UNC Chapel Hill early action, which was October 15th. So I submitted one version and I ended up changing it like a lot, like 3 days before I submitted my like ED application, which was November 1st. I also kind of like took a while right down to the last minute.
Yeah. Other insight into this, Coral, Ricardo?
I just looked it up and I think I started it in August and like finished editing in the beginning of October.
Okay, so maybe about 5 or 6 weeks. And how about you, Ricardo?
So I applied to 2 rolling admission schools. So I knew I was going to need to apply like as early as I could. So I started around July and finished around mid-August when I was applying.
That was my memory that you had finished pretty early.
Yep.
The process of writing a college essay is often one that we sort of think about a lot going into this process, right? Now, I'm not familiar with Dallas's essays, but I know Ricardo's and Ronnie's and Coral's all ended up being very, very different from one another because you are very different applicants. So your essays are really authentic to who you are. What would you say is your best piece of advice on essays? how do I think about them? How do I get started? And what's going to make it a little less painful for me as I start the process of writing my college essays this summer. Coral, you are currently lit up, so I'm going to ask you to start.
I think writing the essays was like one of the trickiest parts, just because I had trouble like deciding on what I wanted to write about for each prompt, because you know, you want it to be something that reflects you, but also like in the right way. But I'd say it's important to just like get your ideas down, and then I kind of like had a lot of ideas and narrowed it down, and then it's good to just write a draft, and then you can edit it a lot to make it like as close to like the best version as it can be.
I love that. Bernie, what about you?
I'm trying to remember how I got to my essay topic. I think I just made a list of things that I was like doing or things that were important to me. And I kind of looked at like how can like a small thing like turn into like a big lesson, and kind of went from there. And I also did this like activity where I just wrote like 500 words about like different topics, like an extracurricular I was doing or like a subject in school I liked, and then just saw like where I could write the most and what like came easily to me.
I love that both of you have prioritized like get some words on the page. That's a good way to start figuring out what you have to say. How about you, Ricardo? We battled a little bit about what your essay topic was going to be. How did you ultimately decide on it? What do you think is your best piece of advice there?
Yeah. So for mine, I don't know exactly how I got to it. I don't really remember, but it was just more like, again, writing things down on a page and then picking it. And ultimately, I ended up picking something that, you know, makes me stand out from more than other people. Like I heard a lot before writing my essay about how, you know, you want to try and avoid writing, you know, a cliche type style essay that many people could write. So I tried going, you know, the more alternate route, try to write something more personal.
Great advice. And how about you, Dallas?
I spent a lot of time just brainstorming stories from when I was younger, or like my story specifically was going into high school, where I learned a lesson that kind of encapsulates how I am now. You see a lot of like essays, you don't want to be generic, but whenever I would go on like a college Zoom or something like that, they would pick like the quirkiest essay possible to like show as like a baseline for you to have. And I would just say you don't have to think of something that's quirky or different or something like that. You just have to think of something that's true to yourself and an essay that's really important to your life. So just be yourself, and you don't really have to conform to what the colleges are showing you.
I love the word Ricardo used to make it personal. You're right. Not everybody is quirky, so they shouldn't be writing quirky essays. And no offense, guys, but like 18-year-olds, 17-year-olds haven't always had that much life experience yet. So you might not have something that feels super amazing and different and interesting. But what you do have is 17 years of experience about things that make you you. So if you can really dig into what are the stories, what are the things, as Ronnie said, what are the lessons I've learned, what are the things that I've enjoyed, what have happened, that's going to get you to a really good essay topic. But this is also part of why it's really important to give yourself some time, because it's take a ton of visions. It does take some brainstorming and some brain dumping and some writing and some work to get to something that feels really personal and authentic. Do any of you have any memories of any favorite essay topics you wrote last year for any of the supplemental ones? Was there something you were really proud of? I won't make all of you answer this because you might have blocked them out, but if anybody has one, let us know.
I remember I applied to Occidental College, and they had like a bunch of mini supplementals, and one was like, what's one of your quirks? And it had to be exactly like 134 words, because I was like their quirk, I guess.
Right.
And it was like kind of challenging to come up with, but I wrote it about how me and my mom had this like spoon collection, and it was just like it's kind of like a nice break from all the like, oh, like what's your biggest lesson, or like some of those bigger topics. And it was just kind of like funny to
Yeah.
like write in that word limit too.
I love that. Anybody else?
Yeah, I don't remember which school it was for, but the prompt was to write about your favorite word. So I ended up writing about a childhood nickname I used to get called, which is the equivalent of the really fast rat in Looney Tunes. I think his name is Speedy something. But I wrote about that as an essay.
Nice.
Hmm?
Not from UVA. Yep.
Huh?
You wrote about that in this area, applied to UVA. Great. And Dallas, do you come with any essays? No.
I remember one of the essays I wrote was for U Chicago. I didn't end up applying. I wrote an essay for U Chicago and I didn't end up applying to it, but it was about imagine a celestial object and if it was made out of a different material and like write a story about that. And that was like a really relaxing thing to actually write. Like that was one of the essays I actually had fun writing.
I'm not sure which school this was for, but there was this one question that was kind of broad and it was like, what makes you unique, or like, what's a fun story from your life? And I like that one because I could kind of make it fun and I enjoyed writing about my topic, which was just like a fun experience that I had.
So there's a question about extracurriculars in the chat, the Q&A. And so the question is, what's the best extracurricular for Stern, NYU Stern? And again, it's a little bit like the essay where there isn't a formula, right? There isn't a formula for building a resume and saying, hey, I'm applying to the school and I have the perfect resume. Do you all want to talk a little bit about your extracurricular activities in the sense that it is also a unique expression of what you choose to do? You know, how was filling out that activity list, that experience, et cetera? So Dallas, do you want to start?
Well, for Stern, I don't know if it's as important to mention because it's already now and you can't go back and do these programs, but over the past like 5 or so years, I've just been doing business and entrepreneurship programs because I've really been interested in that type of stuff. So I feel like filling my summer with stuff like that was really integral to my process. Most of my extracurriculars that I listed, I'm not sure I remember. I started a club at the school called the Black Boys Society, where I would just meet up with a bunch of younger underclassmen and help them get through Sidwell. I also volunteered for Kid Power, which also tutors underprivileged kids in the DC community. I also listed some sports that I played. I played tennis and I played football, but NYU doesn't have a football team, so that didn't really help. And I'm not going to be playing tennis. So yeah, just have a broad range of topics on one hand, and on the other hand, if you're really looking to do a specific thing, make sure that your extracurriculars align with what you're doing.
That's great. Ronnie, do you want to talk a little bit about your extracurriculars?
Yeah, so I just did a bunch of random extracurriculars like throughout high school. I didn't really think about, I mean, I thought about it briefly, but I did a lot of like service-oriented activities. So I was a Girls on the Run coach, I tutored, and I did like a bunch of outreach work. So then when I was like writing my Common App, like making my list, I kind of was like, okay, like I'm gonna go with the theme of like giving back to my community. So then I wove that theme into like a lot of my supplementals. My Common App was all about that. So then when they like read my essays and they saw like, oh, this is like the 10 extracurriculars she listed, then it kind of was like all connected. So I would say, I don't know about like doing specific extracurriculars for specific schools because that's not something I did. But if you can find like a common theme or pattern and like weave that into your essays, it'll kind of like reflect you more in the application. I think the college admissions counselors can see that.
Yeah, the thing is that you don't want to sort of shape your life starting in 9th grade just to be admitted to college. You want to shape your life based on what you're interested in and how you want to engage with your school, right? So sounds like you all have done that. And then as you start pulling together your plan to apply to college, you do what Ronnie just said is, hey, of these choices I made, what do they have in common? What does it tell the schools about me? And then if you can fit it into your narrative, it really helps with the writing, doesn't it? Coral, do you want to talk a little bit about your extracurriculars?
Yeah, I did 2 sports, field hockey and lacrosse throughout high school. So those were like good, stable extracurriculars that I had. And then what I would recommend is like try out some clubs at your school, but find 1 or 2 that you really like and get involved with like leadership, because I'm not like, I didn't do leadership before, but I became the president of the Best Buddies Club at my school. And then that became like one of my most important extracurriculars and like something that I enjoyed and I liked focusing on. And then I felt like it was a good, solid part of my application. So I would advise like finding a really fun club and then getting really involved with it.
That's fantastic. And it starts, freshman year, you may do some clubs and then you switch a little bit sophomore year. But as you said, Coral, you're like building leadership through your junior year, right? So it's nice to share that. And Ricardo, how about you?
Yeah, so one advice that I have for the extracurriculars is to sometimes, if you really don't have an idea of what you want to do, just try stuff that you might not want to like, because that's the only way you're going to find out. And for me, it was volunteer teaching at my church. I tried it out freshman year. I don't want to become a teacher. I didn't really think any of it, but I ended up loving it, doing it for 4 years. I wrote my main essay about it. So, it was a big part of my life. And for others, something I don't see mentioned a lot, but at least was mentioned a lot by my school counselors, is that if you have like little brothers at home, that type of stuff, because my parents were always busy and I have 2 little brothers. So a lot of the time, instead of, going out and being able to do other things, I had to be at home, being a cook, driving them to practice, watching over play dates with their friends. So, that type of stuff, I think you should write down if you do have that, because it is important.
That's a great point. And they're going to miss you when you go to college. You're going to have to set up your texting schedule with them.
Yeah.
Speaking of when you go to college, guys, we only have about 5 minutes left. So I would love to focus the end of this conversation on what you are most excited about for heading off to college. So much of this process feels stressful and intense and anxiety producing, but now you get to where you're sitting and it's exciting and you are headed off to great places. So what is the thing you are most excited for in heading to school? Does anyone want to start? Dallas, you seem to be smiling, so I'm going to ask you to start us.
I'm most excited to, no offense to my friends, I'm most excited to meet new people and go out to the city. New York's like a great city to meet people and just have a different experience in. And I'm also excited to go to my classes. I want to learn finance from some really good professors. So I'm glad I got into NYU. I'm glad I'm going. So I'm really excited for that experience.
That's great. Coral, how about you?
I'm most excited to pick my own classes, meet new people, and be more independent and be living on my own.
And how about you, Ricardo?
It is about leaving my home for a little bit and leaving all the responsibilities I had with that behind. Just being able to do my own type of stuff now independently.
Yeah. And Ronnie, what are you most excited for?
I'm also really excited to be in the city. I remember when I was visiting NYU, I got that rush and I was like, I imagine living here next year, and just all the opportunities that New York is gonna bring me.
That is amazing. I was nowhere near mature enough to live in New York City when I was 18, but it is certainly a place full of life and excitement of every kind. So you both have a lot of fun ahead of you. all four of you have such great new experiences coming. So it's very exciting for those of us that got to watch you get here. It's very exciting to watch you head off to the next level. Maureen, any one last piece of advice before we close out our webinar here?
Congratulations, enjoy your summer, and have a fantastic entry into college and 4 years.
I can't think of a better way to end than that. Thank you for joining us tonight. I apologize again for our technical difficulties, but luckily our panelists all were way more on the ball than I, so they were able to keep things going. We will have our next town hall on July 21st, and that one, convenient enough, is all about the college essay. So join us if you are starting to think about how to dig into all of those things that Coral and Ronnie and Dallas and Ricardo were sharing with us. And we appreciate your time tonight, and I hope that everyone had a great evening. Have a wonderful, wonderful summer, and we can't wait to hear about your college adventure. Take care.